Hey everyone, today on the plastic canvas we're painting a Child of Dagon from Mansions of Madness. Hey everyone, Matt here from the Plastic Canvas and welcome to another Mansions of Madness miniature painting video. Mansions of Madness is a co-op exploration game where players take on the role of paranormal investigators and then depending on the scenario that they've chosen go into a specific location and explore it, gather evidence and clues to try and get to the bottom of some sort of paranormal event. Now being a horror, sort of Cthulhu, Lovecraftian type theme, got some baddies to go up against and our Child of Dagon is one of those bad guys. Now on the back of the base here, where the card goes in, got some text to go along with our character, and it says, even less human than its fellows, this creature's fish-like stare and clammy skin hint at its ancestry. Now, as you would have seen in the intro there's very minimal artwork for this guy to work off. It's just his head, and there's a really sort of greyish blue kind of glow over it that doesn't give a lot of or much indication as to his skin tone and the colour of his clothes and those sorts of things. So kind of just going to make this one up myself to try and match to with what it says in the text, using that as a bit of a guide to help with sort of choosing the colours. So what I'm going to be doing is a very heavily sort of greyish tinted skin tone. So like this, it says like his clammy skin. So what I'm sort of thinking with this guy, kind of similar to, so test my memory, trying to think of what the goat spawn and the child of the goat, I think they were. The way that I painted them was a similar skin tone, sort of thinking that maybe if this guy's been possessed or something like that, or sort of want the warmth of the skin tone to be taken out. So I'll be mixing some grey into the skin tone just so that warmth's been taken out, and then probably some fairly sort of generic colours going on with his clothing, some browns and greys, things like that. And then I'm going to go with like a rusty top to to his sort of. Don't actually know what it's supposed to be. Whether it's not a shovel, but almost a rake kind of thing. Anyway. So yeah, and then I'm thinking over the skin tone, I'll probably then do Rikon Flesh Shade just to bring a bit of the skin tone back, and then just from looking up close you mightn't be able to tell on the camera there, but it looks like there are some wounds in the skin. You might be able to pick up just there especially, so it looks like he's sort of been hacked away at a little bit, so I'll paint some wounds in there. But yeah, so just for the base coat, pretty simple. Yeah, so skin tone with a bit of grey mixed in to take the warmth out of it, get the clothes painted up, and then we'll come back and add some extra touches, but this guy shouldn't be too much in painting up this guy. Just a quick little thing here. One thing I try and do when there's a bit of a finicky sort of edge to a particular surface. So around the bottom of this guy's, we'll call them shorts, I'm sure they were pants at one point, that have been torn. If I just bring it in a bit closer, I might actually be able to see it. You can sort of pick it from any side. So there's obviously quite a jagged sort of edge there as it's been torn. So in the first coat that I did, I was quite careful about how I went around the edge to make sure that I picked out the ups and downs, but didn't go over and put paint on his legs. So now that I'm going back over for the second coat, I'm not worrying so much about going right to the edge, because I was going so slow around the edge the first time. I got a good amount of paint on there. It doesn't need a second coat. So now that I'm going around for the second coat, sort of going close to the edge, but I'm able to pick up the pace a lot more, because it's kind of like if you were, say, painting a house, and if you're going like around the edge of a door or a window, you do the cutting in, so you get that edge around the door or the window that you do quite carefully, and then as you then paint the wall, well, you just roll it pretty quickly. You go over where you cut in, but you then don't have to go right up against the door or the window. Same sort of principle here. So yeah, first coat, quite careful around the edge, but then the second coat, not worrying about going right up to the very, very edge, just backing it off just a touch, because it doesn't need a second coat there, but that lets me go a lot faster for the other, for the rest of the shorts. So just to finish off the base coating for our Child of Dagon here, I've had a little bit of a look at what some different people painted the top of whatever this is that he's holding here, just what colour they painted it. It's a bit of a mix between just sort of some general metallic looks. Some have gone more black. It kind of looks like people have interpreted it as a rake, but because it doesn't come up in the artwork, it's a bit hard to tell. And there's no, there's kind of, if I just bring that right up, I don't know if that'll actually focus that close. Maybe not. Anyway, just at the top here, it looks like there are some lines kind of coming down from the top. So maybe it is a rake, I'm not sure. But just because of the shape of it, what I'm going to go with is a rusted look, kind of similar to the shovel and the axe that the riot guys had in their hands. And so to paint up a rusty look, I'm just going to start with a base of brown and then mix in some yellows and some of the orange that I've now got, just to get a little bit of, just those different tones of the rust, and just sort of blend it in while it's wet, and then depending on how that looks, I might come back after it dries and then just really sort of define some of the rust. Anyway, we'll just sort of see how that goes. But yeah, base of brown, mix in some yellows and oranges as needed to try and get that look. And then yeah, if I need to after it's dried, come back and be a little bit more deliberate with where I put it. Alright, so that's the first step of the rust done there. So what I tried to do is start with brown at this end of the rake head, whatever it is. I'm not going to call it a rake, but the end of the tool, and then blend that through up to that orange at the top, and then I just sort of started to streak some orange down, just because rust can sometimes sort of, run down from the top to the bottom, just to give a bit of a textured sort of effect. Anyway, so going to leave that to dry, and then I'll come back and actually pick out some of the details a little bit more. So while that's happening, I might get on to doing a wash on the Mini. So obviously a brown wash over his vest sort of thing, and then I'm going to do a very thin Reichland flesh shade wash over the skin, because I still want it to have that sickly sort of look to it, so I still have that grey tinge, but I do want to add some definition with that flesh tone, so it'll sort of drop into those recesses between the fingers. There's a bit, if we sort of look just in here, if that'll, yep, there you go. So you can see there is a bit of texture in the skin where there are sort of some wounds, so it'll sort of settle in there, and then I can pick out those a little bit. And then for his pants that have been torn, I don't know if I want to do a black wash. That'll sort of really deepen those recesses. That'll be good for highlighting, but I kind of want them to look a bit dirtier, so I might maybe go with a black wash, but then maybe with a bit of a glaze, I might work in some brown from the bottom just to kind of dirty them up a little bit. Anyway, that'll be something to have a look at sort of down the track when I get to it, but that's kind of what I'm thinking at the moment. So yeah, so that gives you an idea of the colours and the reasons I'm sort of putting them in different spots. Right, so that skin wash has dried there, and I'm really happy with the effect that I've gotten there. It's done sort of exactly what I was hoping I'd sort of end up with, where it's added some depth and definition to the skin, but because I put it on quite thin, it hasn't taken away from that sort of clammy look that I was going for, or like I said earlier in the video, where just the warmth has been taken out of the skin. So it's still got that sort of greyish tone to it, but yeah, the wash has added a bit of depth and contrast to it. Now I meant to stop while I was painting, while I was doing the wash, and just to talk through what I was doing to keep it quite thin. I forgot to, but I'm just going to mention that now, because the thing I found with Reikland Flesh Shade is that out of all of the washes that I've just got the standard Citadel set, is that it is the one that for me has been the easiest to go overboard with, I suppose, and where you just sort of put too much on and it just goes too dark. Now the difference that I found with Reikland when you go overboard with it is, rather than just like the blue or the green wash or one of the colours, rather than it just going too dark, is that it kind of goes a bit blotchy and spotty, kind of like the Mini has a bit of a skin disease, which is, I mean, in some cases might be a good look, but if you're not going for that, then going overboard with it is, going to give an extra effect that I just don't want. So what I was doing is to keep it thin. Now, I don't like to thin down a wash with water, because I have had a couple of times where I've done that and it's kind of just reacted in a bit of a funny way. It's a little bit hard to describe, but yeah, just the way that it dried, it didn't look good, it didn't look smooth. So I don't thin down my washes by putting, like, some wash in the palette and then mixing some water in. But so what I was doing was just with my shade brush, was just putting the tip in the water so that there was a bit of water in the end of the tip, but then just in whatever this part of the Citadel pot's called, so with a little bit of water just on the tip, I then just caught the edge of where the wash was sitting in here. So I really only got a little bit. So rather than going, you can see just on the end there's quite a bit there, rather than going into the middle there, just catching the edge. And then that was the total amount of shade that I used for a whole section. By section I mean like an arm or one leg. So then I just spread that all around. So rather than, sort of painting that bit, going back and getting more, painting there, going back, getting more, just, bit of water on the tip, just catch the edge of where it's sitting in that the catchment bit there, whatever that's called, and then using all that was on there, just that little bit that I got, just on one section and spreading that around, and that just helps to keep it thin. And then as you can see, it hasn't actually given it that full flesh tone, but it's added some depth there, so really happy with that. Right, so the next step with this guy is to start bringing up some highlights. So what I'm going to do with the skin, because it's textured, I'm going to dry brush the original skin tone that I had back on. So that'll just catch the raised sections, bring that back up to that grey tone that I had, but obviously in the recesses it will leave this deeper tone. And then I'll mix in a little bit of white and then dry brush a little bit less, add a bit more white, dry brush even less, until I'm getting to the point where the most amount of light will be hitting, and then at that point there it will be the furthest towards white that I want it to be. That'll be, up on top of the shoulders. And then so I'll just follow that process with the skin. And then with the clothing, I'm just going to keep doing the way that I've been practicing lately, which is just a lot of feathering. So my first coat, like on here, will be just the same brown that I used originally on the vest, which is just muddy brown. And yeah, I'll start putting the paint down where most of the light's going to be hitting, which will be on top of the shoulders, on top of the back, and then just washing the paint out of the bristles. I do that, unfortunately, with my mouth. You can do it with your water. I tend to do it with my mouth because it's very quick and the acrylic paint dries very, very fast, and then just feather it out so that it'll get a smooth transition. And then again, same sort of processes with the skin. Then mix a little bit of white in. I've only got one brown. I do need to get a lighter brown, so I'll mix a little bit of white in and then follow that same process again, but just won't feather it out quite as much, and then keep repeating that until I'm just painting where the light's actually going to be hitting. And same thing with his torn pants there. And yeah, that'll sort of pretty much be it. I do need to go back to the top of this sort of shovel thing that he's got, and just pick out the rust there a little bit more, but that'll be just one of those finishing touches, and then yeah, he should be pretty well done. I'm going to, with his eyes, there is a little bit of definition in there, but what I want to do is make them kind of look really sunken. So I'll either go in with maybe like a black wash or maybe the skin wash again, just to get like quite a lot of shadow just in the, if I bring that in, there we are, just right in the socket there, and then I'll paint the eye kind of normally, so that'll give a real contrast between the eye and the shadow around it, yeah, which will just make it look really sunken, and like he's really sort of sleep deprived and that, so really to sort of push that effect that yeah, this guy's pretty sickly, seeing he's been possessed or something like that. But yeah, so that's just a bit of an explanation about what I'll be doing next, so I shouldn't have to stop anywhere during the actual painting. Alright, so we'll get to finishing this guy off. Just quickly as I start here, for the dry brushing, I'm going to be using this new brush that I've got. It's another Army Painter one. It is their small dry brush. So you know, it's got a bit of an angled tip on it there. I haven't used this yet. This will be the first time, so we'll see how it goes. Okay, so I'm just going to pause with the highlighting here for a moment. Because of the size of the Mini, it's quite small. The dry brushing is filling in the like the recesses of the skin more than what I'd like it to. So I'm happy with the tones that I'm getting, the actual look of the highlights in terms of the colouring. But you know, there's a couple of spots here, like on the leg, where I've still got some definition there. But yeah, overall, it's just a little trickier than what I thought it would be, just to catch those raised sections, just because of the size. So what I'm going to do is finish off highlighting like I normally would. So I'm just going to go back to my normal brush and then just highlight in just the usual way. build up that contrast, and then I'm going to do the wash again in the exact same way that I showed just before. So thinning it right down and just putting a little bit, just enough to give some definition in the textured sections where those wounds are, and but not enough that it'll kill the highlights that I've got. So there'll still be that contrast, but it'll give that definition back to it. And then if I need to, I'll then re-highlight just by hand, just some of those key areas where more of that contrast needs to be. So like on top of his head, he's sort of got a bit of a furrowed brow, so maybe some of those wrinkles there, fingertips, just sort of top of his stomach, like those sorts of areas where I want that contrast to be. But yeah, just so that it'll keep that definition that's been taken away by the dry brushing. But yeah, in terms of the tone, happy with that, but just want to keep that definition. here so far, I've just been using a bit of red mixed in with some brown, just so it's quite a dull, sort of really deep red kind of colour. And I've just been following kind of the contours in the sculpt. So like if you sort of have a look, like even maybe down here sort of at the back of his leg, there are actually some notches taken out of the back of the leg there, so they did sort of look like wounds to me. So I'm just sort of filling those spots in there, a couple of spots on the arm there like that. I added the ones on the stomach and the head there just to add a little bit there. But yeah, so red mixed with some brown so far, so it kind of almost looks like it's older wounds dried a bit. But now what I'm going to do is pick out with a thinner brush with just straight red, kind of the middle of each of them. So kind of maybe the middle of it's still bleeding and seeping a bit, but the edges have dried, just to kind of make it look a little bit more sort of, I guess, gruesome kind of, if I can. If it ends up looking sort of too bright, I'll just go back over it with the darker colour. But yeah, that's sort of what I'm trying to do at the moment. Alright, so that bit of red there in the middle I'm actually really happy with. I'm not sure if it'll come across on the camera. I'm just going to bring that in a bit up. So you can see like this one here, where I've put that little bit of red in the middle there. If you kind of compare that to that one there. So this one here kind of looks more like a bit of an older kind of greys sort of thing. Whereas yeah, if you check back into that one, it just looks a little fresher, but like it is starting to dry and sort of scab up, but it is just bleeding still that little bit in the middle. So yeah, so that's kind of given the effect that I wanted. So I'm going to keep going and doing that. I mightn't do it with all of them, so it gives a little bit of variety. But yeah, happy with how that's looking. So adding that bit of red to the middle of the wounds there to sort of liven them up a little bit. I think I ended up actually going there and touching all of them up with that, just because I got to a point where I thought I sort of had about maybe half to 3/4 had that bit of red in the middle, but what it actually did is it sort of showed how much just the ones without it looked quite sort of flat, and just adding that extra little bit of red just kind of, yeah, just gave them a little bit of extra sort of depth, I suppose. So yeah, so really happy with how he's looking. So I think I'm probably going to leave it there for the actual mini itself. I'm happy with how that's looking. I thought for a second maybe a little bit of blood on the end of sort of what he's holding, but I'm not sure. I kind of like the rusty effect there, so I might leave it there. Time to do the base. If you've been watching the other videos in this series so far, you'll know what I'm going to be doing with him, because he's a sort of human looking mini. He's going to get the cracked stone effect. So I'm just going to really quickly explain what I'll do, and if you want like a more in-depth explanation, check out some of the earlier videos in this series, particularly the sorry, I can't think of the names. So there's the Priest of Dagon and the Cultist. Those videos are just basing, and I can't think of the names of the guys off the top of my head, but there's sort of some bigger guys with like a green, a blue and a brown jumper, I think, and that's just basing as well, so check them out. But yeah, so I'm just going to prime the base, and I'll just do like around his feet, but a little bit of a curved edge, so that when I'm finished, it gives the sort of the impression that the cracked stone continues beyond the limits of what I've done. Then I'm going to be painting on thick agrellan earth onto where I've primed, so that when that dries it cracks, and then I will then paint that with a base of grey with some whites and blacks mixed in to give a stone effect. So that's going to be how I'll finish it off. Oh, and then I'll stick some tufts of grass on, probably some mountain tufts. I think that probably colouring will match this guy pretty well. So yeah, so that's how I'm going to finish him off. got the Grelin Earth here, I was just having to think back to the first time I used this sort of method to do some basing, which I think was Ghost, the first video in this series, and just how the way that I'm painting it now is how it sort of changed over the last few minis that I've done in this style. Because when I did Ghost, as I was highlighting and blending in the whites and the blacks into the grey, I was trying to be quite sort of controlled and subtle, I suppose, with it, really trying to just sort of pick out the edges with the white so that it looked like that the edges of the stones that were sticking up were catching the light, and then trying to work that shadow into the lower parts. But as I've sort of gone on, in the same way that my highlighting has changed on the actual minis itself, where I'm starting to really sort of push that contrast a lot more, which I think is a lot more effective, I'm doing the same thing with the base. So rather than really trying to just catch the edges and just get those subtle highlights, I'm pushing the contrast a lot more, blending in a lot more white and a lot more black than what I was at the start, and that's working out a lot more effective. And I think that's because the dark and the light colours really work sort of with and against each other, I suppose, to really push the shadows and the highlights. Whereas if they're a lot sort of closer together, you don't get the impact of the differences. So, you know, if you watch lots of videos, people highlight in lots of different ways. But yeah, I'm just finding that for myself, and especially because I'm painting board game miniatures, these are not going on show or anything like that. These are never going to be looked at closely. So they're always going to be in the middle of the table. And when you're, you know, a meter away or something like that, and these guys are in the middle of the board, those little details just don't get seen. So yeah, I'm really trying to push for just painting for these guys to be in the middle of a table, and the you know, the contrast that I'm getting need to be seen from that distance, not up close. And yeah, so yeah, I guess just when I started yeah, trying to get those more subtle blends, and that was the same with highlighting on the minis, whereas now it's less about trying to get the subtlety and more just about pushing the contrast so that it's seen more from a distance. And I think it works a lot more effectively than trying to yeah, just get that real sort of, I mean, you're still going for gradual blends and tones and those sorts of things, but I guess that's the difference between, you know, say like on his sort of vest thing here that he's wearing, like the deepest browns are quite dark, but then up on top of his shoulder, it's a very, very light brown, well on the way to white. And by having that contrast, it really pushes that highlight and that shadow, whereas if it don't push each end as far, the effect is lost, I guess. So yeah, so everyone sort of goes about it their own way, but yeah, I'm just finding that, yeah, worrying less about those subtleties and more just about pushing the contrast, the brighter brights and the darker darks is, yeah, just working more effectively. varnish on here just to finish off the mini. One thing that I would actually like to be able to do differently, and this will be something that I'll need to get, is to use the, because obviously you saw this is a matte varnish, and partly because that's the only varnish that I've got, but having a gloss varnish would be really, really good in this spot, because where I've painted the wounds, just to really sort of finish them off, it'd be good to do a gloss varnish on them just so it makes them look a little bit sort of wet and shiny, because as I was talking about earlier, the way that I've painted the wounds is so that around the edge of them, where it's that darker red sort of towards brown, the idea there is that it looks like it's sort of dried and kind of started to scab up a little bit, but in the middle, where it's still sort of bloody and seepy, where I want that to look a bit fresher, that's where I would really, really like to be able to put a gloss varnish just to give that little bit of reflection, a little bit of wetness just to add to the look. But yeah, I don't have a gloss varnish, but yeah, so that'll definitely be something that I'll be getting soon, because yeah, you can, beyond just simply protecting the minis, you can get some good effects with them. And just in case you haven't seen the earlier videos in this series, right back at the start, when I started using the varnish, I think it was with Ghost, that was the first mini that I did a varnish on, and what I found there was that there were a couple of spots in some of the recesses where the varnish had sort of pulled a bit in there, so kind of like a wash, and what actually ended up happening was, because it was thicker than what it should have been sitting in those recesses, it didn't dry totally transparent. So if you know where you're looking and you look closely, you can actually pick out where a couple of the spots where the varnish is. So what I always try to do is just really sort of look over it carefully and just make sure in any spots where it might just settle a little bit. So a good little example is just here on top of the belt. You can just see a little bit kind of collected there, just in that little recess between the belt and just the bottom of the vest. So it's just a case of just going around and just cleaning that up, just to make sure that it's not going to sit there, because it's a matte varnish. I don't want it to see it at all. And if it dries too thick, it will be seen. But yeah, so that was something that I picked up pretty early, and I haven't mentioned that for a while. So I thought, just in case you haven't seen one of those earlier videos, you know, it's just a good little tip to pass on if you if you haven't come across it yet. Alright, so the base is done, the varnish is dried, and that means our Child of Dagon is finished and ready to go into the box and go up against our paranormal investigators. I think across the 4 games that I've painted so far, so that's Pandemic Reign of Cthulhu, Spectre Ops, Zombie 15, and now working my way through Mansions, I think this guy is probably my second favourite one that I've painted so far, and not so much in terms of just my enjoyment of painting him, but more in terms of the level to which I achieved my vision, or I suppose the concept that I had for the mini right from the offset. So, you know, I talked about this back at the start of the video, but I was really going for a look of a person that's been possessed by some sort of demonic presence, and that demon doesn't care about the well-being of its host, and so I sort of tried to achieve that look through this sickly, clammy looking skin tone and these wounds that are still open and seeping, but even despite that, he's still got his rusty rake shovel thing there, still going in against the paranormal investigators. And yes, I'm really, really happy with how I achieved that look that I was going for right from the start. And also the fact that those 2 elements that I just mentioned there, the skin and the wounds, had a couple of steps involved in actually achieving that look. So with the skin, starting with that grey skin tone, and then going over with a thinned Reichland flesh shade wash, not so much to bring out an actual skin tone, but more just to add a bit of depth and definition, because, you know, it had a bit of texture in the skin where I ended up painting these wounds, and that just helped to to bring them out and just highlight where those wounds would be. And then bringing that skin tone back up, and then with the highlighting, just really, really pushing that contrast. So like on top of the head, the stomach and chest, top of the fingers, those sorts of areas, bringing them almost up to a white, just so that as it's in the middle of the table on the board, being looked at from about a metre or so away, the form of the mini and that skin tone is really going to be brought out. And then with the wounds, starting with that red with a bit of brown mixed in, just to really dull it down, make it look like an older wound that started to dry and scab up, but then going back with that brighter red just in the middle to make it look like it's still seeping and oozing there, just to gruesome him up a little bit. And yes, I think those combined has really sort of helped to achieve that look that I was going for right from the start. So really, really happy with how he's looking, and then tied that in with the base and a bit of grass there, so it's kind of like that's growing up through the cracks in the stone, ties him in with the other human looking minis that are in the game. So yeah, I really hope you've enjoyed watching this video as much as I've enjoyed painting him. I hope you've gotten something out of this video that you'd be able to take away and use in your own painting, or just at the very least you've just simply enjoyed watching me paint him. And as I do keep mentioning, please do leave a comment down below, something that you like about the video and something that you think can be improved. I have really enjoyed watching the number of views on my channel really start to tick up now, and with that has come a few comments. I'm getting some really, really good feedback. Both in terms of like how much some of you are enjoying watching these videos, but then also a couple of things to help improve. So a couple of recent ones were around putting up on screen the colour that I'm using at the time. So I'm going to have a look at a way that I can sort of easily achieve that, because this is just a hobby. I am limited with the time that I can put into it, and between painting and then editing, I just don't want to extend that editing time too much. So yeah, I will look at a way to achieve that. So yeah, keep an eye out for that, if that's going to be something that will help you with watching these videos. But yeah, so if you've been enjoying, please do like and subscribe to keep up to date with these videos as they come out. And yeah, again, really, really appreciate the time that you guys are putting into watching these videos. It is why I'm putting them out there, so to see you guys keeping on watching them, yeah, really, really good. Really appreciate it. So yeah, with all that being said, this is Matt from the Plastic Canvas signing out. Happy painting, everyone. Cheers.